At this moment, it is an honor and privilege to introduce one of our keynote speakers, Dr. Collins Boa, who is a professor of health policy and behavioral sciences. He is a global expert on health behavior and a pioneer in addressing anti-racism and decolonization in global public health by centralizing culture and identity in the scholarship of social and behavior change. He leads the global research against non-communicable diseases at Georgia State University. He is the author of Pen 3 and Transform Pen 3 cultural model used to examine and promote positive, acknowledge unique, and transform negative aspects of cultures. He co-authored the Public Health Critical Race Praxis, designed to promote anti-racism in research. He has led research collaborations, institutional partnerships, and mentoring of faculty and students at various institutions globally. He is a consultant to several UN agencies, including WHO, UNFPA, UNAIDS, and UNICEF. He has authored over 180 articles and book chapters. He has authored 9 books, including Health and Culture, Beyond the Western Paradigm, Healing Our Differences, The Crisis of Global Health, and the Politics of Identity, Culture and Place, From the Tree to the Forest, and Health and Culture, Then and Now. He is a former president and distinguished fellow of the Society for Public Health Education, a fellow of the American Academy of Health Behavior, and a fellow of the Academy of Behavioral Medicine Research. Previously, he was head of the Department of Behavioral Health at Penn State University and Dean of the College of Public Health and Social Justice at St. Louis University. Ladies and gentlemen, with a round of applause, let's welcome Dr. Collins Boa as he comes out.
Okay. Do I control clicker?
No. Do you have presentation?
All right. I believe I do have presentation if Mr. Sampong uploaded it. Do we have it? Okay, good. And so that is the, to advance it? Okay. All right, thank you very much. Thank you for that generous introduction. And thank you for the igniting talk. And I particularly appreciate the fact that you scheduled this after lunch. Had that talk be before lunch, I might wonder if I should have my food and question whether or not the meal met or violated some of the rules that you cautioned us about. It's good to be back at Penn State. I was on the faculty here for 32 years. And it's always good to be with friends and colleagues. Your advisor for Pan-African students, Sinfrey Makoni, and I go very many years back. And I'm very happy that my wife is able to join me because she's a graduate of Penn State. She got her PhD in didn't want to, always reminded me that she is the actual Penn Stater. I just walked here and collected check. So my wife is here with me. And our son, Yannick, who went to State High here and claimed Penn State more than I do because many of his friends are here. And then my brother, who I grew up with in Nigeria, who was gracious enough to drive me here from Baltimore. When you change your agenda, or you move the meeting from one weekend to the other, it became sort of a challenge. And he came through and said, just fly to BWI and you spend the night with me and I'll drive you down. So I'm here and I thank him for that. And I say all this because when I talk about a collective journey, it's really not just a rhetoric, is something that I live by in everything that I do. That we are here when we think about what the future holds for what Pan-African organization and movement stood for is that it is a collective journey. And two very simple sort of mantra to keep in mind about my talk. If you are here looking for an answer, you came to the wrong forum. I believe in questioning the question, because the question can be posed in a way that the answer is a given. So this is about questioning the question. And the second part is that the journey of Pan-Africanism is about learning to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. It sort of became a mantra. I was at Penn State at the time when the email read PSUVM. So every email I sent out would say, learn to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. It would be years later before it became a sort of an expression that's being commodified in other places, but that is fine. But the point here is that I want to question the question of what we need to engage in as a collective journey. Notice the journey has a single individual, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes, why that is so important. But what I want to share with you is going to be reflected in what does it mean to build an African three-legged stool. Not four-legged, because it's four-legged is too balanced. Cannot be two, because it's two, you can't really do much with it. It has to be three. And it's so important because it means that you have to be equally invested in the stability of each of the legs for it to maintain stability. But more than anything, before we start, we need to deal with the platform. What is it sitting on? What is the foundation? What is the foundation of this three-legged stool? Then I'll start with a story that I first wrote in Healing Our Differences. I'm going to change the character and gender, but I used to present it as a story of two men who went to the cemetery to pay respect to their loved ones. But this time it's two women who went to the cemetery to pay respect to their loved ones. Here I draw my hybrid identity. One is a Nigerian, the other is an American. They're kneeling side by side on the tombstone. The American has a vase of flour. The Nigerian has a bowl of soup. Customary to each culture. They knelt side by side. In the version that I rendered, it was the way in which the men questioned each other, the logic of presenting flour to somebody who is dead when they cannot wake up to smell the roses, the logic of presenting a bowl of soup to somebody when you know they cannot consume the soup. But these women were not going to fall into the questioning of men. They instead were reflecting on how it's so interesting that they are engaged in a cultural practice whose practical value is actually relevant for what they are there for, but yet they quickly notice that they are actually engaged in a cultural practice that cannot be questioned because of relevance, because that is not why you engage it. But there was something about the Nigerian that started wondering, does it mean now that the vase of flour is going to become important to the bowl of soup? So these are two cultures. Keep that in mind. Because a part of what tends to happen, and I've talked about this, is that over time, the soup culture start to believe that the flour culture is the standard to which they must aspire, and start discounting their own way of engaging. In fact, start questioning the utility of their practice, but never really questioning the utility of the practice they ascribe to that is just equally as irrelevant. It's just that there is such a structural weight that uphold that practice. But these women, that is what they were reflecting. And this notion of culture one and culture A coexisting, I did not say culture one and two, nor did I say A and B. because one cannot be subsumed under another. They respond to different cultural ethos. So culture A and B coexisting is what I want to spend some time addressing. So we have a flower culture and a soup culture. The question for you to start thinking about, which is mine? Because when you occupy a different context from one where you were born and nurtured, you're likely going to be a hybrid individual who draw from different culture, who may actually subscribe to different culture at different times. You are in an institution of higher learning. We heard of the presentation earlier. The question always comes down to, is one subsuming one under another? And what does that mean? So I go back to my own, I don't know if this is working, I'm not, the three-legged stool. My last book that came out this year, Health and Culture Then and Now, I presented 3 basic thoughts that underscore everything that we do, that help to explain the way I approach the issue of health and culture. And that number 1 is language. Language and the way we structure narrative. The idea that we have to question the question. The language is very important. The second is that everything that we do is about storytelling. So my wife always reminds me that everything we do, we're telling story. And it's a question, all the presentation you had earlier, we're telling story. The question of what language is used, we can get to that later. And some of the questions that were posed later, we're trying to find out where is the hope in the story that was being told. And is there hope in it? Because for a story to sustain and remain with us over time, there has to be that sense of hope and healing, which is why many scholars over time start to talk about the importance of hope and the importance of understanding that when we produce knowledge, we engage in knowledge production. There's a big part of it that has to carry a sense of hope and possibility. And that is really what is going to cut across what we're saying. So we have the foundation of culture 1 and culture A to work with. When we understand that, the ground is balanced. The stool is now ready to be built. You have to build the first leg. The first leg rests on African expression that said, until the lion produced their own historian, the story of the hunt will glorify always the hunter. There are instances where the hunt may not be the focus of the story, but the story of the hunt glorifies always the hunter. What are hunters to do? What does it mean to be historians who are lions and lions that are historians? And that is a part of what we want to talk about today. And it begins with language. Historians are lions and lions as historians. Toni Morrison reminds us that with that may be the meaning of life, but we do language. That may be the measure of a life. Every time we tell the story, the language that we use carries meaning and has a deeper implication for what we are trying to convey. All right? And lions and historians, who are these? You. A part of what we are trying to do is how Pan-African students reminding us, in part based on the igniting talk that was shared earlier, sort of reminds me of this Native American expression that we have not inherited the land from our forebears. We are merely borrowing it from our children. For those of you who share the Ignite, who actually sharing what you are working on, a part of our responsibility is to see how we safeguard your direction so that you are on this collective journey of healing. So Pan-African students, you are the lions that have to tell the new history. But with what? how do you even begin? How do you understand the ways of engagement, the nature of relationship, and what does it mean to be historians that have to tell a new story with a new language encoded in hope? My start started as a Nigerian and a Edo man, where I always draw on the life of Ovora Menogbaisi, who was an Oba of Benin, and that fought the British. And the very early British invasion of the land, he was the Oba. His story is being talked about among all the Obas of Benin in Nigeria. He's the one that even younger generation keep reminding us of what lion he is in retelling a new story or in framing a culture to understand how a story should be told. For those of you familiar with Afrobeat, you may have heard Charlie Poppin, Ogbasi no Givan or Ogbasi. That is really a new generation reminding us that as old and long as the history of Ovora and Ogbasi, it still remains with us to anchor the journey we undertake. But there's a more contemporary, for me, as I was growing up, person who really understood what it means to be on the journey, to be a lion that tells history. Fela Anikulapo Kuti actually in Kolo mentality, when you listen very carefully to the lyrics, he's really saying that you say you are a colonial man. You say you be colonial animal. You don't be slave here before, then don't release you now, but you never release it yourself. You were slave here before. They have freed you, but you have not freed yourself. In other words, you know that you have a subculture is important, but you constantly subsume the subculture under the flower culture because you are put yourself in bondage. You've been told that this is the possibility, that it is not a question of one or the other. There's a writer that talks about the tyranny of the all and the genius of the and. It's actually a business scholar that wrote about how we have to understand that one thing will stand, another will stand beside it, as Achebe would say. So the question of a journey of a Pan-Africanist, have you released yourself? And in what ways do you really confine yourself to a space from which you were released, but you chose to embrace and subordinate your soup to flour? The way we think about this, that is Fela, in terms of the journey he undertook. He also said that the secret to life is to have no fear. And that is easier said than done. But he said it because he lived it. And I'll talk about others who embraced this ethos and became a part of their life. But for the lion to produce their own history, I will share a couple of ways to think about the nature of relationship that affects us. And in the past few years, as we address issue of decolonization and anti-racism, there are scholars that have been talking about 3 levels of agency, 3 levels of racism that we need to understand, 3 levels of how we understand ways that we liberate ourselves and liberate others in the process of knowledge production. In the Pen 3 model, which was referred to, I often talk about if you want to really understand a population, you can understand it from the perspective of the person, that is the me, myself, and I. You can understand it from the perspective of the family, that is the you and I, the us and we. But where much of the work was focused on is understanding at the level of the institution, the structure that governs everything that we do, done in such a way that you assume that is the way it's supposed to be. And this is what we have to understand, that there are different levels of understanding what agency and transformation means. These are lenses. I did some work in South Africa for many years, and I will hear sometimes young people, contention over was it Steve Biko or was it Mandela? You have to support Steve Biko, say no, it's Mandela. Mandela. I'll say to them that you not understanding that there are different levels of understanding the role of the historian that has to produce new knowledge. The same thing with Malcolm X and Mandela, that there are those leaders who focus on the me, myself, and I. The important work of understanding the way the system may subordinate you so that you release yourself mentally. There's a different way or a different lens of focusing on the structure of the institution that has to be transformed. Otherwise, you may have the wherewithal to say this is not going, should be happening. If the structure and the institution is not changed, you're not going to be able to experience the type of freedom that you seek. That Biko and Mandela were approaching this from different lenses. So were Malcolm X and Martin Luther King and others in between, that we ought not to be looking at the either or, is the genius of the and. So the lenses has to understand that a lot of the work that was done in anti-racism was focused on dealing with unconscious bias. That function at a particular level and the individual relationship. The unconscious bias does not change the curriculum or challenge the curriculum to surface those who are within the academy, within those institutions, who will make contributions so that scholars like us, as students, can begin to draw on their energy and use that as a way of inspiration in the work that we do. And that there are many ways to understand the structure and how that has to be the focus of what we do. And then with structure, again, it doesn't have to be the flower vase. It could be soup. The structure carries different images. And in fact, there is a famous Vietnamese movie maker, Trent Trimihard, who did some work in Senegal many years ago that talks about the cyclical building also have implication for road building for different design. When we combine everything, the problem becomes people learn and they start to assume that the cyclical building that we have must be the foundation. If we need to grow, aspire, we have to aspire towards rectangle and square and so on and so forth. And that is part of what we have to, that it's not about erasing one thing, it's about recognizing that the other thing actually stand beside it. And to really help to excavate the way in which the structural impediment has created problem for the youth, Frantz Fanon many years ago had wrote in Black Skin, White Man's that for 20 years they poured every effort into a program that would make the Negro a white man. In the end, they dropped him and told him, you have an indisputable complex of dependence on the white man. And that continues today. We've been liberating you, we've given you all this thing, now you are still depending on us. But the structure is there. We can have program that talks about unconscious bias and have barrier of tests that you can undergo. Because if the structure conditions you to think certain way, that is the way you will think. Which is why Frederick Douglass once noted that it's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. The investment in the youth, in what goes on in school, becomes so critical. And I've often said that it's easier to build strong students than to repair broken professors. Because in some instances, we've invested so much in the vast flower that we think that is what gives us access to contest outside of ourselves. And we tend to deploy those same tools for flower and forget that it is not really going to help the children. It doesn't mean you hide one. You have to elevate the others. The late Ngugi wa Thiong'o saying that the child was now being exposed exclusively to a culture that was a product of a world external to himself. He was being made to stand outside himself, to look at himself. Being made to stand outside oneself to look at oneself. You really talk about colonial mentality that Fela talks about. So the journey is about, as students, as young scholars, as early career investigators, how do you stand within yourself to understand that this is where the journey begins? It is not about standing outside oneself. So Gugu Wationgo, Decolonizing the Man, was, there are books and work that has been done in a way to help us understand why it's so important that the journey of a collective healing starts with the mind, decolonizing the mind, and Chiwenzu's decolonizing the African mind. I can spend hours talking about those, but the question of leadership, for those of you who are interested, who are in different fields, who must understand the nature of how knowledge is produced, the ways of knowing, that it's important that it was some of the people we celebrate today started at your age, at your level. By the time you get to some of our ages, it's almost too late. MLK started leading an organization at age 26. Malcolm X, 27. Chinua Achebe, Things Fall Apart, was published, he was 28. Mandela was 26 when he joined ANC, and 38 when he was in prison. Chimamanda Adichie was 26 when he published Purple Hibiscus, the first book that came out. Amanda Gorman gave The Hill We Must Climb at age 23. And of course, Donella Fraser was 17 when he recorded the murder of Mr. Floyd. So it isn't that professor or faculty come out and tell you what the journey and the challenges have been. It is that some of the most consequential work occurred at an age, your age, sometime younger than you, or perhaps you were a little older than they were. So it is not insurmountable that some of the transformation that occur should be occurring at a time where you are gathering and thinking about what does Pan-African, what does it mean to be Pan-African? To the point where, in referring to colonization, the very well respected writer, late George Lamy of Barbados, once wrote that it was like a terror of the mind, a daily exercise in self-mutilation. So you hear about 1,000 cuts today. There's a way this scholar puts it, that this is what colonialism meant to us, a terror of the mind, a daily exercise in self-mutilation. In fact, Mr. Lamy was here at Penn State during one of the Touch of Africa events many years ago. A colleague of ours brought him from Bucknell to celebrate the time with us. So the importance of the work that you are doing, the foundation is being laid for you. And as the Malian historians, and I refer to him as philosopher, somebody challenged me at a conference in South Africa, but it's not a philosopher. I said, depending on how you define that. Historians said, the hand that gives is always on top. The question is, even when relationship occur between flour and soup, it is positioned in a way that the flour may be on top of the soup. So when we engage in looking at who will support us, what relationship do we have with other organizations, even the Pan-African relationship? Let's keep in mind, let's not forget the Pan is meant to be Caribbean, African-American, Africa. There's a tendency when I've seen Pan-African written, there are some parts that are left out. The Pan is very critical. In your group, I don't know the composition of your group, you have to draw on the energy that established this movement and why it's so important to understand the hand that gives should not be on top. There has to be a way of redefining the nature of a relationship. So you build leg 2. Chinua Achebe once said that no one should enter their home through somebody else's gate. No one should enter their home through somebody else's gate. So I'm in public health. We often say we don't want to enter public health home through clinical and medical gate. For those of you in food science, the question always you have to ask yourself, is the gate through which you are entering the presentation that you shared in Igniting through the African gate, through some other gate, whose gate do you enter your writing? People who write, authors, writers, understand this very well. That is, in building that second leg, you have to know what your gate is. And not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. You have to face what the gate is. What gate has you used? We talk about 3 levels, 3 lenses that historians should use. You have to be able to recognize which one matter. And that has been the core of the book that we referenced when I was introduced, Health and Culture, published in 1995, Healing and Differentiation, published in 2007. And because in storytelling, which is a part of the gate, Ben Okri, one of my favorite authors, reminded us that the fact of storytelling hints at a fundamental human unease, hints at human imperfection. Where there is perfection, there is no story to tell. The fractures and the challenges that has to frame your story, but doing it in such a way that it is from the perspective of your gate, not what somebody told you it should be. And what is that? And those are the part of the things that you want to understand. And when we reject the single story, when we realize there's never a single story about any place, we regain a kind of peace. And this is Chimamanda Adichie's famous TED Talk on the danger of a single story. And it goes from the lens of understanding the 3 levels of understanding the nature of the gazes and the power that define us, but it also relates to understanding that our story is never about a single story. It's about multiple stories, and the way we understand other people's story has to go beyond the often negative perspective that has been grafted onto those people's identity. So it's like flipping the map upside down to make sense, and which is what this map in my office, that if the world were turned upside down, in some cases, actually after I looked at this, it made more sense to me because of the earlier curiosity I had as a child as the gravitational force, the flow of river, and all of that. But it saw cartography as more political as it is just dispensing knowledge. And so you almost have to turn the world upside down. And that is what led to the creation of the Pen 3 model that was referenced. And when one thing stands, another thing must stand beside it. There is only one way. At this end, there's only one way, something that is new to my people. It's part of the motivation that led to the development of a cultural model to understand what is it that stands behind the conventional way we have been taught to understand behavior. We have been taught to understand ourselves as African. We have been taught to understand what is important to value, whether it's in the food we eat, the clothes we wear, in what context we think certain clothes matter. Is it only on weekend? Traditional said that clothes is supposed to represent something. What happened between aesthetic and production of knowledge? Are there ways that we devalue what is ours when it's a context of knowledge production? We think it has to do with the brain, that the clothes should stay at home. It's only when it has to do with art and culture. These are all the matters that we need to examine. And that is really what drove me to develop the Pen 3 model. A quick example of what that means in terms of when one thing, another thing else stand beside it. When we say data in a cultural standpoint, you often think of number. What about words? And for years, qualitative research has been fighting the need for institutions to recognize that it doesn't always have to be coupled with quantitative work. It stands on its own. That words can be data, depending on how you generate them. What about language? Is it gendered or seniority? Edo language, Yoruba language, Igbo language are not gendered languages. They are languages of seniority. What happened when we're trying to use the Romance language to understand the logic and knowledge that this language is produced? Again, when one thing stands, another stand besides it. Extended family. We solely extended when the reference is from a nuclear family. Because when I was growing up, there was nothing like it's family. So even though you recognize and understand what it means, does it mean nuclear family is constricted family if the other family is extended? What happened in names and identity? One contest, particularly the Northeast US, has come to valorize single first name as the goal to which everyone must aspire. What happened to family or last name? Flour and soup. It doesn't mean one should be erased. It simply means that there is a place and space for understanding the reason why they exist. Learning, as Paulo Freire argued, the focalized view of knowledge rather than the context or the totality of what is actually happening in that particular environment. A way of affirming the role of community. One's own self-worth is tied to the worth of the community to begin one's to which one belongs, which is intimately connected to humanity in general. The collective, the role of the family becoming very central to the way we produce knowledge. We understand ourselves. We in Africa have no more need of being converted to socialism than we have of being taught democracy. Both are rooted in our past and traditional society which produced us. Mwalimu Nyerere has talked about this in the context of, again, understanding that one cannot be subsumed under the other. If you went to story-rhetoric communitarianism, you have to understand the power of the collective and how we are rooted in the way it governs us. But a number of the references I make may be men, but there are ways that communal force is being left out of some of the things that we do. And I think that became very clear in the work of people like Fumilayo Ransom Kuti of Nigeria, Margaret Ekpo, Wangiru Matai of Kenya, or Stella Dedavo, who literally saved Nigeria from the Ebola epidemic by sacrificing her life. And when we talk about people to identify where do you draw your inspiration, energy from, there are so many that we can draw from and so many sources that we should know. So leg 3 is knowing who you are, claim your space. The references because we have this distinction between what we are taught to remember and what we have learned to forget. References and food, this is what we are taught to remember. Some of the things we have learned to forget are all of this. Where you see study being conducted on food and resources within our African context, you hardly see study being conducted on from agbalumo to pear to, we say, garden egg, and to walnut. These are ways of understanding whether or not we have subordinated everything that is ours to what we are taught to remember. The language of sight, I've often shared this, that it's about structure. When I started at Penn State in 1984, I taught a course in first aid and emergency care and started to wonder why this particular skin color banded. You know, it wasn't until COVID-19 that I find my own skin color banded in the store. After all these years, because the color is there, the context is there. Is my time up? Okay. The color is there, the context is there. So this is the way in which structure normalizes what is there that we don't question. You don't believe me? Open your Zoom and look at the emojis. What is the default emoji? And what do you have to do to manually change it into your skin color. There have been studies done over and over. I'm supposed to be talking to a group of AI designer next month, and these are the issues that I want to raise. The knowledge production is not neutral. But the point you have to remember is, it doesn't mean that the person who made the skin color their own was trying to disregard all that. It simply means that when you are developing your own, don't just rely on what is there. Come up with something that is also a default that reflects what you want it to reflect. It reflects you. Because no one walks alone. He who's leading, African proverb, he who thinks leading has no one following, is only taking a walk. There are many people designing new ideas, producing knowledge where they are walking alone. No one is following them because the path they are taking probably already be journeyed. The journey of hope begins with healing. In the last phase, what I want to talk about in the 4 minutes, I suppose, that is left, is the seat of the stool. You have the foundation, you have the 3 legs, you have to sit somewhere. But to sit somewhere means you have to begin to raise questions about what you have understood and the power of facing challenges, the knowledge that challenge is supposed to prepare you for what is to come. A famous Nigerian education, Tai Sholarin, in 1964, 4 years after Nigeria's independence, wrote an opinion editorial in the January of '64 in the Daily Punch that he titled, "Nigeria, May Your Road Be Rough." He was actually sending a message of blessing because Shora knew very well that smooth seas do not make skillful sailors. You need troubled water. And so for all of you engaged in this, I hope you have troubled water, that may your road be rough, and that you learn to embrace your fears, and that you may encounter defeat, but you must not be defeated, as Maya Angelou advises, and that you must learn to dream, as Benjamin Mays taught us. That it isn't calamity to die with dreams unfulfilled, but it's calamity to not dream. So the part of the work of imagining how one thing, the substance beside the flower, is the power of dreaming. And the size of your dream must exceed your capacity to achieve them. If your dreams do not scare you, they are not big enough. So they has to be above what you think you can achieve. And that is what we try to capture in my book, Health and Culture, Then and Now, that language is critical, is how you shape the storytelling, and is what creates this sense of hope. But in all of that, always recognizing that the challenge that you're facing has been established for you before. We face neither east nor west, we face forward. We prefer self-governance with danger to servitude in tranquility. And what that means, I will end with another story. I began with a story, I'll end with a story. The story of a snake that owned a horse, and a very knowledgeable toad that was observing this snake riding a horse. Snake was riding this horse along the path. It wasn't a pretty sight. It was sliding up and down the saddle. The toad is observing and had to beckon the snake to come over. And what are you doing? And the snake said, I'm riding my horse. I said, come down, let me teach you how to ride a horse. You're not just doing it right. And the snake slid down, the toad got on the horse and proceeded to ride this horse in such a beautiful way that you were prepared to give the toad all the award in the world. Came back to the snake and said, that is how you ride a horse. And the snake said, thank you very much, come down. Came down, got back on the saddle and said, to know is good, but to own is better. What is the point of being a good horse rider and you don't own a horse? I've told that story in different contexts, but I went back and read Chinua Achebe's work to better understand that the horse riding story came from the Hausa culture, and there's an aristocracy to the notion of owning without knowing. It is not just in Hausa context. You know, there are people who actually believe that you just own, you don't need to know. The message to the person who needs to know is to know that they can know to own. They don't have to only restrict themselves into the knowing. And that's what Tyler Perry did. It's not just about riding a horse. He actually owned the terrain on which you ride horses so that he can dictate which kind of horse should be on there. You don't have to like the way the horse is riding or the way this person sits on it, but to own. But actually to also know. It's not an either or. We face neither east or west, we face forward. A part of it is owning. So the question you have to ask yourself, what direction do you face?
Thank you very much. I'm sure we have all learned a thing or two from his enlightening session. I'm leaving here with understanding that where there is perfection, there's no story to tell. And our story is never about a single story, that we should embrace our fears. So I'm leaving here as a very brave woman. We are going to take just one question because we have to leave here by 3 p.m. And any other question you want to ask, you can ask him when we move to the other side of the building, which is from 105. So just one question and then we leave.
So, what we have been taught to forget and things, what we have been taught to remember and things we have been taught, we have learned to forget. Good. I am not a history researcher or a historian, so I'm going to talk from the education aspect of whatever that we are doing. This is a very nice forum for us to remember the things we want to remember, for us to eulogize and idolize all historians and history that have spoken about African history and indeed their stories. But we know that over the years, African curriculum has undergone a lot of structural changes. When we want our children to learn things of the past and then implement it in the present, but we also want them to be modernized. So the modification or modernization of African culture. Now the question I'm asking is, when it comes to curriculum design, development and implementation, the implementers, who are the teachers aside from it? And then the top-down approach of where the hierarchy takes care in designing all this curriculum is now given to the teachers to implement it. That takes me to the point where I would say that it is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. The men figuratively here are the teachers who have been silent. How can these broken teachers build these strong children that we want to build for the African future? And then in that case, what role does historians or history researchers play back in Africa when it comes to designing and structuring the curricula to train the next generation of African children? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the question you're raising actually is one that you should table for your organization to tackle. And I say that in all seriousness. It begins with, for example, I don't know how many of you who grew up in an African context in a place where the language of the context is spoken by your parents, but you for some reason don't speak it. And so some of the issues starts from what, again, we value and what we devalue. Now, for someone who didn't grow up in a context where they hear the language, that is fine. But going back to school, some of the things that were changed. I was a school child at the time where we were being penalized and meant to pay fine for speaking our Edo language in school. And so it doesn't it's gotten to a point where it doesn't even get to that point now because the child doesn't even know how to speak their language, so they don't have to worry about paying fine. There is a sense that if you only just discount the soup and focus on the flour, you will be a better student. You're going to be able to contribute to development, all the things you identify. But no one has told them that actually it is understanding the soup that grounds you better in how you understand the culture of the flour. There are many, I've seen enough that is getting frustrating of people who don't speak the language of their context where they grew up, not being able to be as innovative as those who did and now embracing a different language. I don't know if that makes sense, if you understand it. Who has the question? Yeah, if you understand. So a part of what your group has to talk about is what have you been taught to remember and what have you learned to forget, beginning with the language. And then in the storytelling, if I were talking to the Igniting Talk student, I would say, is there a way in 30 seconds or 1 minute where you could explain everything you just said to your grandfather who didn't understand? So storytelling, how do you tell this story to somebody who is not in there? And then the third part is, how do you encode hope? The desire that this is going to, is something that is going to lead to some sort of collective healing. So it starts with the foundation is, what have you learned to forget? If you did not learn the language, it's really not too late. You can capture it. I hope that responds to the question you asked.
From here, we'll move to Forum 105, which is on the left side of this building. When you move out of this building, you take the left side. There's someone there who will direct you. It's outside of this building. Thank you very much.